You're watching JCT TV. This is Bible study for the 21st century. So this program, friends, it's a real departure from the norm. You saw a bit of this last week in the latter half of the program. But this program, for both of my teaching segments, I'm going to give you a little bit of an overview of what is happening in sub-Saharan Africa and southern India, where we are working with WOW, working for Orphans and Widows, which you see promoted on JCT every program. It's a gripping story. COVID-19 is having a huge impact, and I'll tell you about it right after this. A few years ago, I woke up in the middle of the night with a sentence on my brain. Once upon a time, in a village far away, there was a shepherd boy who sang for the angels. I was so taken aback by this, I went to my desk, wrote it down, and the next day went back to it, and guess what? A Christmas story emerged. It's called The Boy Who Sang for the Angels. It's a Christmas story, and I'd like to send it to you as a Christmas gift. I so appreciate your support of JCT and WOW. It means all the world to us, and I hope at this Christmas time this book can mean a lot to you. Here's how you can get it. So friends, just in case you missed it last week, I'll give you a little bit of a background to WOW so that you understand where I'm coming from. I'm a pastor. I went into the ministry 52 years ago. I actually started preaching when I was 15, but formally into the ministry when I was in my early 20s. And I have been doing ministry ever since. Now I'm living in denial. I think I'm not an old man, but I am. By God's grace, I'm still trucking on and intend to, with His health and strength, pursuing the far horizon for many years to come. Having said that, it was 22 years ago when I was pastoring a tremendous church in Vancouver, British Columbia, that the Lord really called me to minister to orphans and widows in sub-Saharan Africa who'd been impacted by HIV and AIDS, to the point that I resigned my mega church, some called it, and began from scratch in sub-Saharan Africa with what I knew and who I knew. And I knew a lot of pastors because when I was pastoring in Jerusalem in the 1980s, I used to get called down to sub-Saharan Africa a lot to do various conferences, conventions, and do circuits of churches in South Africa. And so I had a lot of contacts there. Anyway, I won't get into all of that. I've talked about it before, but the point is, in the late 90s, actually starting into the year 2000, my wife and I established WOW, working for Orphans and Widows. Since then, we have been profoundly engaged through local churches. We don't do anything without local church engagement because I believe that the church is the hands and feet of Jesus. But through local church engagement, pastors, pastors' wives, both male and female pastors, staffing, volunteers, mainly volunteers, we began to reach out to orphans and widows in the catchment areas of local churches. And the thing grew. And now we're involved on a major level in South Africa, Zambia, Malawi, and now just beginning in southern India. Our work has never peaked. It's always growing. Every quarter, there's more than there was the quarter previously. And as the needs and our exposure to the needs grows, God's provision has grown. The Lord has all the money He needs to get done what He wants done. He chooses to do it through us, through you. That's why I share this with you, so that you can share the burden with us. But the point is that anything we have, anything we give, ultimately comes from him, right? There's no good thing we have that has come from anyone other than the Lord. And the Lord has a heart for the world. And he speaks to our hearts and moves us to do scary things like Kathy and I did 22 years ago, and leaving an established, beautiful, big church to start from scratch and nothing, not really knowing what would become of it. If someone had told me, 22 years ago that we would have the scope of ministry we have now, and that we'd be coming your way with a television program that's national, prime time on Sundays, both in America and Canada and around the world on the internet, I would have said, what? What's the internet, for one thing? Anyway, here we are. But now, after 22 years of dealing with people whose immune systems have been severely compromised by HIV and AIDS, most of whom are orphans and widows, in their thousands, now, for the last 6 months, we have COVID-19. We're talking about pandemic on pandemic here. And believe me, the HIV and AIDS pandemic still exists. You don't hear about it much anymore. You get the impression that all is well. It's not well. Most of the people who are HIV positive in sub-Saharan Africa don't know they're HIV positive. Just like a lot of people with COVID-19 don't know they're COVID-19 positive because they're asymptomatic at this point in time. Last time I shared a little bit of what one of our champions in Zambia had communicated with me. I want to go into Malawi right now, which is a very small country in sub-Saharan Africa. We've been involved in Malawi now for 20 years. And my champion there just sent me a few things just in the last few days. Lockdown, COVID-19 lockdown in Malawi is not a possibility as people rely on subsistence living. Now, what does subsistence living mean? Subsistence living means that if you don't get something today, you have nothing to eat today. There is no bank, there is no bank account. There is no fallback plan. You have absolutely no food security. In fact, you may even not have access to water on a regular basis. You have no extra clothing. You have no furniture in most cases, or if you do, it's a few pieces of broken sticks made into some kind of a rudimentary chair. You have nothing. So when you are subsistence living, you have to take those few tomatoes, who knows where you got them, to the market, pile them in a little pyramid pile, sit beside them, and hope that people walking by will buy one or two from you. Because if they do, then perhaps you'll be able to buy a little bit of nchima, which is ground cornmeal, to feed your children. That's subsistence living. So social distancing, masking, you can't afford a mask. And you can't afford to be socially distanced. Either way, it seems to be a zero-sum game. You're going to die one way or the other. Lockdown in Malawi is impossible, says my champion there. She goes on to say many Malawians, you'll get this, many Malawians believe COVID is a, quotes, town or, quotes, Westerners pandemic. There is stigma and discrimination among villagers whenever someone returns to their community from town or wearing a mask. They're taunted with shouts of, "Corona, Corona, Corona, Corona!" And people scatter. It's like they're a leper. And then some of these dear people believe that wearing a mask shows a lack of faith. If you really believed in Jesus, you wouldn't get sick. What's with the mask? Let Jesus be your mask. Sounds very spiritual, doesn't it? But that's a part of the cultural reality they're facing there. But there's more. You know, in Malawi, we're dealing with, we have about 1,000 volunteers. And we're dealing with thousands of people. I'll tell you how many thousands in a minute. But a big part of what we do in Malawi is support groups for people who are HIV positive. And there are so many who are. So in the various, rural communities where we work, we always have 2 or 3 HIV and AIDS support groups who meet 2 or 3 times a week just for support. They sit, in circles, and they talk about their disease, and they talk about the goodness of the Lord, and they share faith with one another. Most of them now are on what's called antiretrovirals, which is a fantastic drug cocktail that neutralizes the HIV virus. It doesn't destroy it, but it keeps it at an even keel, and so that they're not infectious while they're taking antiretrovirals. So in a sense, they can live a kind of normal life, and with an added food supplement or two and some good nourishment, which we provide them through our volunteer base, they're actually able to get along pretty well, but they're still HIV positive, and there's still stigma and discrimination attached to it, and they still need support from one another. Well, they meet, or at least they were meeting. Awareness campaigns, group meetings, trainings, all of these things that have been happening for years now cannot happen because of COVID-19. So these sources of comfort, of prayer and help are sorely missing. And even though in many cases they're meeting outside, the stigma with COVID-19 on top of the HIV reality is just too much fear. And so people are living without support in Malawi. Something else that's happening with our ministry in Malawi is that we have created 68 feeding centers for children. We used to have 14, now 68. Why? It's to reduce the number of children who are there, to reduce or to mitigate the possibility of transmission, even with children. And so this has stretched the volunteers, travel time, carrying time for food packs and food nourishment, what have you. And the numbers of children, interestingly, at the same time, has increased because vulnerable young primary school kids are coming for food. They hear about the feeding center, the school is a kilometer away, and they come to be fed at the feeding center because they have no food at home, they have no food at the school. And so there's been an increase in our feeding responsibilities at this point in time because of COVID-19 of 25%. And, whenever I'm there, I'm a big old, North American, and I look so prosperous. And compared to them, I'm a multi-millionaire. And also I've flown in from North America. Most of them don't know where North America is. I remember one widow saying to me, "Thank you, Pastor Jim and Kathy, for coming all the way from Canada, although I do not know where Canada is. Thank you, Jim and Kathy, for coming from America. I do not know where America is." And there they are, about to meet their maker because of starvation. This is much of what we do.
The Bible tells us that true religion is visiting orphans and widows in their distress. The Bible also says that God is a father to the fatherless and a defender of widows. Heaven's core values for mankind begin with God's heart for the least of these. When you support WOW, you're in the sweet spot of God's heart for the poor. Yes, we're only a small player in this great drama, but at least we're on the field. Please give generously.
I just want to give you a few more minutes of update on the work that we're involved in with WOW, working for Orphans and Widows overseas, and the added pandemic The first pandemic being HIV and AIDS, which is not going away, but now the added pandemic of COVID-19. I was talking about Malawi last time. Let me tell you a bit more about Malawi. This is again from our champion in Malawi. Most Malawians in community cannot afford masks or soap. Water is not always readily available. I know this is true. I have seen, it's usually the little girls who will sometimes spend 2 hours with a bucket on their head, walking to a polluted water source, filling it and walking back another 2 hours just to give some polluted water to their siblings and their afflicted orphan or widowed mother. I mean, you know, we take water for granted, right? An emergency effort has been adopted by our ministry to create and distribute masks, soap, and water buckets to over, are you ready for this? 30,000 households. You heard me right, 30,000 households. The feat is daunting, but it's a fraction of our work. I mentioned to you last segment that we have 1,000 volunteers in Malawi alone. That tells you a lot of thousands of homes are being impacted by that kind of a volunteer army. 30,000 households. What we do with WOW is we provide home-based care. We go into those little rondavels with our volunteers and we do our utmost to help these people, in many cases who are breathing their last, leaving little orphans who then will be cared for. The thing that kills me the most, though, is going into what's called orphan-led households where both parents are dead and it's just the kids raising themselves, where the oldest one may be 8 or 9 and he or she is the adult. I have a hard time talking about this without weeping. Here's a story. Sylvia. My name is Sylvia Nkomo. I'm 52 years of age. She wrote this letter to us. I stay alone, and whenever I am too sick, my nephew and neighbors come to help me. My biggest challenge is feeding. My family abandoned me a year ago after my sister contracted tuberculosis while nursing me. The only food I had then was raw papa, that's cornmeal, it's ground up. And a small brazier was my only warmth as I didn't have enough bedding. My life was at the mercy of well-wishers and neighbors. Because I could hardly walk, I had to find someone to take me to the clinic 3 kilometers away. But one beautiful morning, God sent me some volunteers from WOW's home-based care ministry. Their presence alone brought light and joy into my house. They prayed, gave me some medical care, and brought a food pack. Now they visit on a regular basis. Next visit, they're bringing bedding as well. Hello? Not enough bedding? Too weak to walk? No transportation to a clinic to get her antiretrovirals? I know where this gal lives. Not far from her place is another place with a man that I met with who was a few weeks from death, and he was lying on the floor and he had bed sores. And I said to our volunteers, I want to get him a mattress, and I want to get him a mattress today. And so we went to the closest market and found him a mattress and brought it back. When we brought it in and placed him on it, it was like he died and gone to heaven. He couldn't, his face just glowed. A mattress. Think about it. Mary, my name is Mary Kobangola, and I turned 67 a few weeks ago. Since contracting HIV, my health has drastically deteriorated. My family has deserted me. Life is tough. I rely on neighbors and well-wishers to help me with everything. I recently suffered a partial stroke, and since then have lost balance so that I cannot stand on my own. I want to say many thanks to the home-based care volunteers from WOW. These people are heaven sent. Despite the coronavirus threats, these volunteers come here every day to check on me and provide assistance. May God bless them for their kindness and love. When Jesus was talking about visiting orphans and widows in their distress, he said, "Inasmuch as you've done it to the least of these, my brethren, you've done it as unto me." These volunteers with whom we work, to me, are heroes, not only of the faith, but heroes of human compassion and love. Most of these volunteers are widows themselves. Did you hear that? Most of them are widows themselves. Many of them have had no food security themselves. Many of them have gone out as volunteers to help others who are dying when they themselves have nothing in their stomachs. And I've done everything that we can do. And I can say right now, I think we've pretty much touched base with all of our volunteers in this regard, to make sure that all of our volunteers have food security. And I have made sure that all of our volunteers' children are able to go to school because there are school fees involved. This to me is a big part of home-based care. Providing some measure of educational foundation for the children of these stricken widows so that they have something to build on in the future and are not caught in the poverty cycle. You know, it breaks my heart on the one hand, but it encourages me on the other. We've been at this so long now that some of the orphans we started working with 22 years ago are today teachers and nurses, and a few are in medical school. And they've broken the cycle of poverty. Where would they be today if we hadn't come their way with our church-based volunteers 22 years ago? May God bless them, she says, for their kindness and love. May God bless you for your kindness and love. My name is Marjorie. I am 37, a mother of 3. I tested positive for HIV in February 2019. By March, I couldn't walk. My physical and mental health deteriorated drastically over the next few months. Bedridden, I could not provide for my children. I thought we might starve to death. I thank God for WOW's home-based care volunteers who began to visit weekly with food, medicines, and especially the supplement selenium, which helped me with my appetite. We have provided millions of capsules of selenium over the last 15 years. It's just a basic mineral. It's not a medical thing. It comes out of the earth. Any country that has a lot of selenium in its soil has a low HIV prevalence rate. It boosts the immune system. It really works. All of the countries where we provide it, their medical authorities have given us full permission to distribute it. It's amazing how it helps those who are ill. In combination with antiretrovirals and good nutrition, amazing. Now I'm able to sit, walk, leave my room to lay on the couch for fresh air outside. No longer am I stressed with providing food for my 3 children. With God's help, I am slowly returning to health. For a while, I thought I would die, but I've learned that God has the final say. You know how many times I've just been blown away by comments like that? I've learned that God has the final say. Here's somebody who, like Job, has every reason, as Job's wife recommended he do, to curse God and die, to blame God for their affliction, to blame God for their poverty, to blame God for the suffering that they've endured, and to blame God for the insecurity their children live with. But instead, they bless the Lord. There's only way the only way to explain that is to say that they have been supernaturally invested by the Spirit of God himself, and it is God the Spirit who is speaking even as they bless the Lord in their affliction. It's one of the greatest testimonies in my view, in my life, to the reality of faith, to the integrity of the gospel, that those who have every reason to curse God are thanking God for his mercy, thanking God for his angels of mercy. These precious volunteers from local churches who, at risk to their own lives because of COVID-19, are reaching out and blessing them in their need. And so, you know, when you work with us in supporting these precious people, they're saying, God bless you. God bless all who see beyond their own personal need to the need of those whose desperation is beyond expression. And I want to thank you for what you're doing to help.
Why dance when you have very little? When you live from day to day with food insecurity, rampant disease, sickness, and death? You dance because your heart is full of love for God and your hope is strong. WOW has come alongside as the hands and feet of the Lord, providing both home-based care and assurance of God's love. You're happy and you've got to dance. Please support WOW. Let's keep them dancing.
So by the grace of God, with WOW, working for Orphans and Widows and JCT, Jim Cantelon today, we are engaged in the most basic life and death struggles for the least of these. Jesus is the reason for this. And I'm humbled and grateful for the calling of the Lord to get involved in this most basic of ministries. I don't have deep pockets, neither do you, but you know what? My pockets and your pockets in combination can literally not only transform the lives of thousands of orphans and widows, but it can literally bring them everlasting hope through their encounter with people who love Jesus and who lead them to faith. This is so encouraging to be involved in something like this. So encouraging that you are encouraged and you're helping. When you see those promotions for WOW, make note of the coordinates and do what you can to help us do what we can for the sake of the gospel.